All right, so we're very excited to kick off the day with our first speaker, Kim Rivers, CEO from the now largest cannabis company, Trulieve. Kim, welcome to the stage. Everyone give a round of applause, please. Fantastic. And moderating today is Debra Borchardt. Everyone, round of applause for Debra. Thank you. Executive Editor, Green Market Report. All right, thank you guys. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for sitting in and listening to probably the best-looking panel that's going to happen today. So you're starting off high, but sadly, it's all downhill from here. Just a bunch of guys. So I know that during the pandemic, a lot of us bought a bunch of stuff, you know, and Kim, did you make any big purchases this summer?
You know, fashion was a little off, so we felt like, you know, we would look around and maybe make a couple of purchases in the cannabis space. So we actually just completed our largest transaction to date for Trulieve, and I think for the cannabis industry as a whole with our completion of harvest.
That's right. Yep. So Kim, as she said, and you, of course, we're joking because you all know that Trulieve did acquire Harvest Health and Recreation, and now they are the big kahuna in the cannabis industry. But, you know, this is a pretty sophisticated audience, and a lot of people in here were very familiar with Harvest. It wasn't the prettiest girl in the room. There certainly was some baggage. There was a lot of messy relationships there, some marriages and divorces, and a little bit of debt. What did you see in Harvest that made you see value? Where was the diamond in the rough? What made you think, I'm willing to take some of that baggage because I see something there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, interestingly, a couple of things. One, Steve White was the very first CEO that I met in the industry, actually, at a Benzinga conference a number of years ago. And it was my first cannabis conference as a public company CEO. And I remember very vividly that we were on a panel and we were the only two CEOs that were actually even uttering the words EBITDA or profitability at the time. And at that point, they were the undisputed market leader in Arizona and had a very similar philosophy that we did at Trulieve in Florida. And so it was a very complimentary, and we stayed in touch. And I think part of it was as an observer, also as a friend, watching Harvest go through what they went through as a company over the last several years. I think there are invaluable lessons to be learned there. And so as we know, they got caught up in a lot of the, I'll call it go-go activity of 2019 specifically, and expanded too fast, maybe not with the best strategy or strategic backing. And then they dug deep and they right-sized the company and really became laser focused on markets that had and aligned with their core values as they redefined those. And so for us, I believe a couple of things. Number one, having strategic purpose, backing expansion is absolutely key. So some of you may not know that Trulieve, back in that same time period, we were facing a lot of pressure from many of you to expand, right? Oh, it was the old you're just a single state operator. You know, when are you gonna grow up? When are you gonna join the party? When are you actually gonna become relevant in this space? And we had to take a long, hard look internally with our board and management team and ask ourselves the questions. Are we, are questioning, right, all the time. Is this strategy correct? Is this working? Is this where we need to be? Is this how we want to be positioned? And really for us, a couple of things stood out. Number one, we weren't ready. We didn't have the foundation built within our company. We didn't have the bench strength built. We didn't have the systems built. And two, we didn't have an articulated strategy for expansion. And so we spent a year and a half getting those things right the best we can within our company. So building out our systems, building out our people, and building out the strategy. And that's where this hub concept came. Oh, apparently that was the right thing to do because the music turned on. And so
got the approval.
Yeah, exactly. I got divine approval.
Yes, God came down and said, yes.
And so this is going to be really funny. It's like I'm doing a music, I don't know, with voiceover. So the hub strategy I'm going to try to keep going through this, is basically where we take what we've learned in the Southeast with Florida and the scale that we've achieved, which is very, very important, I think a very key differentiator, and we look to apply that across the country in a very specific way. And so the Northeast, we started to build out, and then of course with Harvest, the Southwest. And so when we looked at Harvest, there was a couple of key things going back to your original question. Number one, they did have depth in a number of those very, very key regions for us, which we thought was very important. Number two, we knew that we could reposition their structure very quickly and make a meaningful impact right off the jump. And so you all saw that we just did a $350 million debt raise, the lowest rates in the industry. We're able to reposition that debt at much lower rates. We also have growth capital, so where we can invest in those markets and actually turn them on in a more meaningful way very quickly. And so we're looking forward to accelerating growth within those key markets and building out those hubs here very, very soon.
So, some people feel that, go big or go home.
Yeah.
But what we've seen within the industry is some of the companies like Acreage Holdings and MedBen, and I'm not throwing anybody into the bus, I'm just saying as examples because they both were bragging that they were going to be the biggest and the largest.
Yep.
And then it just got away from them. Mm-hmm. And so they both had to scale back and sell assets and things like that. How are you guys going to be able to now successfully navigate being the biggest?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that when you think about, there's a lot of different metrics that you can define what biggest means, right? Yeah,
most states, most sold most.
That's right. That's right. And so I think that for us, again, it's about having these prioritization. One, very, very disciplined in terms of our prioritization. Discipline in our approach, understanding how exactly we're going to invest dollars for ROI in key markets. As we think about, and again, we take supply chain lessons from Florida and apply those to other states. We see right now, for example, investments we're making in Pennsylvania, that pulling through to not only, of course, brand awareness and stickiness, which we think is very, very important and will be important over the long term, but also, of course, increasing profitability almost immediately. And so, again, I think coming back to our roots, having a strategy, being able to be very disciplined and hold fast to that strategy is one of, again, our key differentiators. So it's not go big and us throwing dollars around the country kind of in a haphazard way, but having very identified targets with very specifically measurable results that will come to fruition over both short, medium, and longer term for us. Again, in those core markets, developing around those key regions for us across the U.S.
How do you appeal to the customer in the sense of trying to get past the idea of being corporate cannabis and having a product where you're able to control that quality and deliver a really nice product without, now all of a sudden you start to get into scale. How do you keep that product protected?
So I think that there are a couple of things there. So I think that you have both top down and bottom up, right? And I think that when we talk about, becoming corporate, which is inevitable to some extent when you're talking about scale, right? You have to have efficiencies, you have to have repeatability, you have to have processes that you're able to roll out across multiple markets, across multiple sites, right? And that tends to lean to sort of this idea or this feeling sometimes of being, quote, corporate. But you can't lose, especially in cannabis, and I've talked about this for a very long time, you also can't lose that bottom up and that connectivity to the community, the connectivity to the advocacy part of what we do, because we are still literally changing the folks' conception of cannabis. I mean, everybody laughed when the raffle included a gravity bong, right? Everybody
Those are so expensive.
They are very expensive, but right. I mean, think about that, right? Like, why we're sitting here at a cannabis conference, right? Where everyone here understands that this is the business that we're in, but that was still kind of maybe a little awkward. And so we're still breaking through stigmas even today. And so having the purpose behind advocacy, being involved again at that grassroots level is really key. And what I mean by that is empowering folks who are within your stores, within those communities, to actually take part within those communities in a managed way is really important in order to maintain that authenticity, and also empowering brands that come from that community. And so we have a 3-tier brand approach. We have our corporate brands, we have our national brand partners, Bang's in the house here, actually, Jamie, woo woo. But we also have local brand partners, and we have local brand partners that we've nurtured and we've developed that have deep ties into the communities that we also operate within.
With all this expansion and consolidation, and again, this is a pretty sophisticated room, what are the blind spots that the industry is missing? Where are our warts, and how are you guys going to address that, or how do you think people should address that?
Yeah, so I think that I would be remiss if we as 2 strong women in this industry weren't talking about the fact that if you look around the room today, there is a significant continued lack of true diversity and inclusion within this space. And I'm not going to overly get on a soapbox here because I think that we all know it, but the question is, what are we doing about it, and how are we reaching through to communities that should be at the table and that should be represented? And I think that if we as an industry don't address that, it's going to become and it should, quite frankly, become a more and more significant issue. What we're doing to address it, we just recently announced that we have now a board made up of 50% women, which I'm extremely proud of, and they're kick-ass women. And I think, when you look at our management team, when you look at our leadership across our organization, we measure, we report on it, and we talk about it. And so I think that something that would be very maybe easy for this group to do is to ask those questions about the businesses that you're investing in, because diversity of thought, it's proven over and over and over again, diversity of thought around a table leads to better results and better performance. And I'll always say, measure me on the results. We can talk about a lot of other things, but at the end of the day, measure me on what we're delivering quarter after quarter, year after year. And I think that you'll find that those companies that actually have a sincere dedication to bringing folks up through leadership and are the ones that are going to achieve the best results. So I think that that's probably the number one. There are a lot of other things we could talk about there, but that's what I would like to highlight.
Obviously, Trulieve, a big player in the South in Florida. The South has not been rah-rah on legalization. Mm-hmm. And so, and I think it's really interesting. I'm a native Texan. I grew up in Texas, and Texas was flooded with cannabis from Mexico back in the day. And so it was really part of the culture in Texas as much as it was in California. And yet the conservative groups there are, as you pointed out with the stigma, they're turning it into this political thing where the conservatives are against legalization. And if you do the numbers on the population of Texas, they all smoke weed. How are the cannabis companies going to be able to target those markets that are kind of actively working against it? It's a weird thing that you do have these populations and residents that want it, and yet the politicians are starting to turn it into a political thing. Yeah,
so I think Florida is a great blueprint for that, right? So if you look at Florida, the Republican stronghold actually has gotten more significant. There's more seats that have gone Republican over the last 4 years than have gone Democratic. Republicans almost have a supermajority in our Senate. So, and you look at our program, right, and it's one of the most successful programs from a population and patient onboarding, standpoint in the country. I think there was a statistic that just came out that Florida is the third by products sold, the third largest cannabis state in the country, believe it or not. And we only have a medical program. So I think that if you take those lessons, and early on, it was really about focusing in on the medical benefits of cannabis, and which are becoming more and more indisputable, every day. Leaning into research, leaning into physicians, leaning into advocacy. One of the groups that was, very instrumental in Florida and in the program there were the Canna Moms. You'll hear me talk about them quite a bit. I developed a relationship with those women very early on in Trulieve's career and in Trulieve's existence rather. And I think that having those conversations and making it real for them is very, very important. So that goes back to our grassroots connectivity within markets. And I think that then once you have a program, even like in Georgia, for example, there's THC caps, there's some limitations there, but once you have a program, folks realize that the sky's not falling. And they also start to realize that folks that they know, loved ones, and it really becomes that person by person, experience by experience, conversation that occurs over time. And it really turns some of the most staunch initial opponents to the biggest proponents. And I've seen it happen firsthand in the state of Florida over a couple of years. And so really it's just getting started, getting them started and then having that conversation evolve over time. And I think that that's what's going to happen. I believe that's what's going to happen in Georgia. And to your point, we think that the Southeast is really the next new frontier of cannabis reform in this country. We think that as a company, we understand how those conversations, happen and how that and how we need to be involved on the advocacy front. And we think it's a huge potential population for us to target over the next, call it 2 to 4 years.
Yeah, I feel like Texas is that state that so many people are eyeing. One, the huge resident population,
yep.
It feels like people or companies are trying to get what little bit of licensing is happening there right now. It's just so that they can get in early.
Yeah, Texas is interesting because the legislature only meets once every 2 years. And so,
only for so many months.
And only for like a hot minute. And so like with Texas, it's just going to take longer because there's only, it's a much smaller window of time to be able to gain momentum and to get something accomplished. But as I say, I think across the U.S., it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. And there's movement that's happening. And I think, again, with Georgia, Alabama is in conversation, North Carolina. So we're starting to see that that shift starting to occur in the Southeast.
Obviously, Trulieve has a cushion of cash. You guys are very comfortable. You have been, as she mentioned, they have been somewhat profitable from very early on, which I applaud. As a reporter, I'm always seeing companies in their numbers, and Trulieve was one of the early big players that actually had net income. So it was something that you should be proud of for achieving.
Thank you.
Not a lot of companies, though, have that cash.
Yep.
And you start to get to that inflection point of, I need to grow, but I need money to grow. Am I going to accept this? It starts to become this dance. Is there, anything or advice you can give to some of those players that might be in this room where they're facing that moment of, what do I do from here?
Right. So I think that a couple of points on that. Number one, nothing is guaranteed in cannabis, particularly as it relates to capital markets. Like nothing is guaranteed, right? It definitely ebbs and flows, and it's here one day, it's not here another. So I would say we have had maybe a different relationship from a financial perspective than others. It was very important for us to make sure, and it's very important for me to make sure that we're not accepting money from the capital markets in order to keep our lights on, right? To make sure that you're building an actually sustainable business behind the scenes. That's first and foremost, right? Like make sure you have the dollars to run the business. Secondly, then the question becomes when to take growth capital, when not to take growth capital. Absolutely, I would say that if there is an opportunity that is going to grow your business and reach additional consumers, you should absolutely do that. Check yourself on the rates, check yourself on the terms, because that's only getting better, right? So I think that right now we see, and I apologize if any of them are in the room, there are funds out there and there are folks out there that are scrambling a bit. They're changing their business models because they see that rates are coming down. They see that traditional banks are actually starting to offer, state banks are starting to offer loans, particularly in the construction side of things. So I would just say be very tenacious with your terms and make sure that you are turning over rocks that aren't necessarily cannabis funding tools to make sure that you are getting the best available terms for your company, because everything with cannabis is more expensive, y'all. I learned that early on. You put the word cannabis in front of something, you're paying 3 times as much, right? So go outside of cannabis whenever you can, because typically you're gonna end up saving on your costs.
And I feel like now that cannabis is becoming like the hot thing amongst the non-traditional groups, that they all want to get in. So that might be a good opportunity to become their cannabis customer.
Right, their first entry into the space.
Right. We're almost out of time. Do you have any final parting words?
No, I mean, I just would say that I think that, again, it's great to be in person, first of all. So thank you, Benzinga, for having me. It's amazing to see everyone in 3D, right? Then lastly, I would just say that, the demand has never been stronger for cannabis products across the U.S. We opened our 150th store location this morning. And so it really is, it's an amazing time to be in this industry. Thank you to all of you out there who are our shareholders. We appreciate your trust and are looking forward to continuing to build a sustainable and profitable company that values shareholders in both the short and long term. And as I always end all of my speeches, I'll just say onward.